Hey, what's going on? This is the Body Punch Podcast, and my name is Naz. Let's talk about UFC 263 live, and what an exciting card it was. What a fun, action-packed card all around. Now, if we look at the main event to the early prelims and all of the fights, we saw some ups, we saw some downs. In some of the fights, we saw a lull in the action. Overall, the Arizona crowd was very rough in some instances, I think. But in some cases, it was amazing to have the fans back. It seems like, and from my perspective, that sometimes it just feels like the fans have never left. It feels like what we saw here today is a perfect representation of why the fans are perfect to have back. There was never a doubt in anybody's mind on never having the fans before, but I think in some cases we got so used to not having the fans, especially in these events in the States happening and having everybody back and this action-packed crowd that we saw. It was just fun for everybody, I think. Especially for a lot of these fighters, it hyped up the fights, and we're going to get into it. Let's just go quickly through what we saw. When we looked at the prelim fights, the Hakeem Dawodu fight was a big fight for him, and it was a big test for him, especially testing out what his fighting style would be like against a heavy-duty wrestler, and we saw that. We know that he has the power. We know that, and I've talked about him in many instances when it comes to this podcast, is the fact that Hakeem Dawodu could be one of the rising stars for Canada. Now, I don't want to give his opponent any less credit than he deserves. He had an amazing game plan, and he went in there and exposed Hakeem Dawodu in some instances. But Hakeem Dawodu could be so much for Canada. That's why I keep on bringing him up in every single one of these podcasts. We talk about him a lot. Just how powerful he is and just the attitude that he brings into that arena. Now, we saw Joanne Calderwood lose a fight against Lauren Murphy. Joanne Calderwood had a lot of aspirations coming into this fight, but Lauren Murphy just came in with that game plan and with that she just went forward and did her thing. Joanne Calderwood, unfortunately for her, she's going to have to go back to the drawing board. But that was a fun fight. Now, this Eric Anders versus Derek Stewart fight, man, what a fight that was. It seems like Eric Anders is one of those fighters, and this includes Nate Diaz, and we'll talk about this later on in the podcast. But Eric Anders was just eating those leg kicks. Derek Stewart was just coming forward, and what a fight that was. Eric Anders showing what he does best, especially what we've seen in his career. And we talked about this in the pre-fight show, but Eric Anders coming off of that Khalil Rountree fight, we saw him exposed in a couple of situations there, especially with that, true Muay Thai style that Khalil Rountree came out with in that fight. It really surprised him, and I think it just kind of switched up his career. He got the unanimous decision win in this. What a fight. That was a really fun fight to watch. And then the fight after that, oh my God, what a fight that was. I think I'm going to keep on saying this, so get ready for me to repeat this over and over again. But Drew Dober versus Brad Riddell. First of all, what a way to start off the night for the New Zealand fighters, him and Israel Adesanya, coming from New Zealand, dealing with the unfortunate events of their teammate. I believe he got murdered. He was killed in some situation, unfortunate event. Condolences to everybody affected with that. But Brad Riddell came to fight, and Drew Dober wasn't shy about being in this situation as well. Drew Dober kept on coming forward, made this such a fun fight for everybody to watch. What a treat for the Arizona crowd and everybody watching. And this being a prelim fight, it was a great fight, unanimous decision, but it was close. It was a close fight. I think in the third round, Brad Riddell kind of inched a little forward and got the win there. Before we get into the main event fights, I want to highlight some of the fights in the early prelims, and one in particular. It was just an interesting contest, and we talked about this in the pre-fight podcast. But the Chase Hooper, Steven Peterson fight, Chase Hooper, he showed a little bit of a lack in his striking ability. He went for that leg lock a couple times, but Steven Peterson remained calm in the situation, got the unanimous decision win in that fight. This is one of those things where Chase Hooper's got to go back to the drawing board again after a couple losses. We'll see where his career lands off, if it's going to be with the UFC, because he was so young when he started with the UFC. He never got the chance to develop in another organization. And when you come to the UFC, you better be ready to face the best of the best, because Dana White and company are gonna do that to you. They're gonna throw the best of the best at you, and you have to be ready no matter what, no matter if you haven't started in the UFC or not. So let's talk about the main event fights here. Man, this Craig Paul win over Jamal Hill. Jamal Hill coming into this fight, walking in, he was very confident when he walked into this fight, and Paul Craig just went in there like an assassin and took him out. He got that. He dislocated his arm at first. Some of us, and myself included, thought he might have broke it, and it was hard to watch. His arm was kind of flopping all over the place at one point, and the referee, he could have stopped it a little bit earlier, but thank God he saw his arm kind of flopping around there and had to end the fight. What a win for Paul Craig, coming in there very aggressive and facing someone like Jamal Hill, who most people thought had the striking capability to take him out, but still went in there and used his jiu-jitsu, which he's known for, and took out Jamal Hill. Let's talk about the next one, Damian Maia versus Belal Muhammad. Belal Muhammad went in there. What balance he showed. I think Joe Rogan talked about it multiple times, but the balance that he showed for not being able to be taken down at any point. I think he was 0 of 20 or something. I don't know what it was, but it was a crazy number, and Belal Muhammad was able to not be taken to the ground and use his boxing. We saw a couple leg kicks that he threw, but Damian Maia, this might be one of his last fights in the UFC. What a treat to watch Damian Maia when he is able to do what he does best, which is take people down and use his jiu-jitsu. But Belal Muhammad stuck to the game plan and really forced Damian Maia to trade with him on the feet, and he was able to get the win off of that. I think Damian Maia, we've always talked about this, but if he was able to mix his jiu-jitsu with a little bit of wrestling and not just go for that single leg takedown and force down his opponent, it could have gone a little bit better for him. We talk about this all the time, but there's some people that can thrive in one dimension, but they always need to bring in another. We're going to talk about this later, but Israel Adesanya is showing his defense and not being stuck to the ground really helped him in his fight against Marvin Vettori. The next fight that we're going to talk about, Leon Edwards. Man, that was such a crazy fight to watch, because Leon Edwards was just smoking Nate Diaz, no pun intended, in this whole fight. And Nate Diaz, out of nowhere, comes back in the 5th round. Thank God this was a 5th round fight, because this fight, even though he lost this one, doesn't diminish his stock at all. because at the end of it, Leon Edwards was stumbling. He was stumbling in this fight. Nate Diaz hit him with the 1-2 punch, stumbled Leon Edwards, and in my opinion, if Nate Diaz just put the pedal to the metal a little bit more and stopped pointing at Leon Edwards, he might have been able to stop this fight. And we haven't seen Nate Diaz have that one punch kind of power. You know, he usually hits people with volume strikes when he finishes his fights. But man, imagine if Nate Diaz won. We're going to give all the respect to Leon Edwards for doing what he did, because he did win 4 out of the 5 rounds completely. But for him to come back, Nate Diaz, and wobble Leon Edwards like he did was just incredible. It was just amazing to watch. And just the resilience that was shown, it was amazing. But could you imagine if Nate Diaz won this fight? It would have been spectacular. It would have been a spectacular win, and most likely it would have caused him and Kamaru Usman to fight. I was just, every time I was watching during the Deiveson Figueiredo fight, during the Israel Adesanya fight, I was just thinking, what if Nate Diaz went a little bit more aggressive and went after Leon Edwards at the end of that fight? This could have been a totally different story. But still, I don't think that Nate Diaz's stock went any lower because of that ending. If this fight would have finished the way that we thought it would have finished, with Leon Edwards running over Nate Diaz, then I believe his stock would have been lower. But in this case, Nate Diaz did what he does best and come back at the end. So let's talk about the second to last fight. Deiveson Figueiredo gets defeated by Brandon Moreno, becoming the first Mexican-born UFC champion. What an amazing way for Brandon Moreno to come out and submit Deiveson Figueiredo. It was a great fight to watch, because Brandon Moreno, I believe physically he was at the top of his game, and then also mentally he just knew what Deiveson Figueiredo could do in terms of striking. I think this fight, Brandon Moreno just switched the narrative on this fight, and Deiveson Figueiredo had no excuses, because in the last fight he was battling a major bout with something. I believe it was due to the weight cut, but Deiveson Figueiredo went into this fight and just showed why he deserves this belt. When it comes to a fight like this, it was just so emotional for Brandon Moreno. At one point, it seemed like he didn't even know what happened, what he had done, and then when Deiveson Figueiredo showed the class that he did, then it kind of switched in his mind. He was like, "Oh wow, okay, now I know what actually happened." He won the flyweight title and became the first Mexican-born champion in the UFC. What an incredible fight to watch, because of the total 180 flip from the first fight. The first fight was so close. Now, let's talk about the main event, Israel Adesanya versus Marvin Vettori. Marvin Vettori and Israel Adesanya went into this fight. Some people thought, and myself included, that the wrestling of Marvin Vettori might cause some issues for Israel Adesanya, but Israel Adesanya came back, and I think he learned a lot of lessons from the Blachowicz fight. In that fight, he had a lot of issues with the wrestling, but I think it was due to the fact that Blachowicz is so amazing with his striking. Even though I think Joe Rogan talked about it, even though he has that tremendous power, he does do a lot of amazing things when it comes to his striking. And Israel Adesanya showed why he's the champ at middleweight, why he's the king at middleweight, and this was he put a stamp on this. There wasn't much argument that could be made on maybe a Marvin Vettori rematch again, because this is it for Marvin Vettori. I'm not saying his UFC career is over, but we now know definitively that Israel Adesanya will defeat him. One last thing about the Nate Diaz fight, just to go back on that, I really want to see a rematch. I know Leon Edwards asked for Kamaru Usman, but I don't know. I just got to see a rematch. I think that's one thing that we have to kind of we might need to address because of that fifth round. But that's one last thing about that. I just really think that we could see a rematch with that fight, and it has to happen sometime soon. Nate Diaz being 36 years old, I just think it just has to be done. Back to this Israel Adesanya fight. At one point in his career, we thought that it was kind of over, but this just kind of puts him back on pace. And for him to call out Bobby Knuckles and ask for his fight with him to be in New Zealand in his backyard instead of Australia, which it was before, that could be a real, I was about to say that could be a real fight, but they're all real fights. But that's an amazing fight. That's great to see a former champion come back and fight for the belt. It's been some time now. Israel Adesanya got the belt from him in 2019. Then he had his fight with Joel Romero, Costa, and Blachowicz, and now his fight with Marvin Vettori. I think it's been some time now. We have to see that fight. Robert Whittaker is going through the division as well and facing whoever the UFC puts in front of him. And what a fight that was at UFC 243 in front of that massive crowd. And Israel Adesanya just he KO'd him in 2 rounds. But now we've seen Robert Whittaker come back and do these amazing things. We got to see that fight again, and this just kind of puts him on track. I think when it comes to Adesanya at 205 or maybe even heavyweight, we got to pump the brakes on that just a bit. But this was just a crazy fight. It was a crazy card overall. We went through it. We went through all of the major fights here, but just to recap again, the Damian Maia and Bilal Muhammad fight, that was an amazing fight. I really think that this might be a time for Damian Maia to kind of call it quits. He had such an amazing career, and he did so much. I mean, Joe Rogan talked about how Damian Maia fought for the belt against Anderson Silva in Anderson Silva's heyday. That fight, unfortunately, it didn't go so well, but I believe that was in front of the Abu Dhabi crowd, and there was some issues with that one. I just remember a whole fiasco about that. But Damian Maia, I think he's either at this advanced stage, he's got to somehow learn some new tricks and add some new tools to the bag that he already has, unless he wants to call it quits. We got to see what happens. He didn't say anything to anybody, but that, it was a great fight for Bilal Muhammad. This Bilal Muhammad, for him to defeat Damian Maia, it's a rite of passage in that welterweight division. Next, after that, we saw the amazing fight that Nate Diaz had with Leon Edwards. Leon Edwards really put it on Nate Diaz throughout that whole fight, and like I said, I would love to see a rematch of that. I know Leon Edwards really wants to face Kamaru Usman, but Kamaru Usman, I think he's got to face Colby Covington again. Colby Covington gave him one of the hardest tests out of everybody in that division, and why not see Nate Diaz come back? We have a question mark now. What if there was a couple extra minutes at the end of that round? Could Nate Diaz finish it? And I'm very not disappointed, but I'm just like, what if Nate Diaz could have went after him a little bit more? After that fight, we saw the amazing fight that Deiveson Figueiredo and Brandon Moreno had. Brandon Moreno doing what a lot of people might have thought was impossible, but he did it, and he became the 125 champion of the world, the first Mexican-born champion, and did something amazing. It was spectacular to see, especially the emotion after that fight, and give credit to Deiveson Figueiredo for showing the class that he did, being able to hand off the belt just like that, and then saying that he's going to be available in 4 months' time. After that fight, we saw the main event. We saw Israel Adesanya defeat Marvin Vettori. Marvin Vettori, unfortunately, looked like he was outclassed, especially on the feet. He had a chance for a rear naked choke, but Israel Adesanya showed that he's adding levels to his game and still showing the sophisticated nature of his striking capabilities. Great fight overall. The fans might have seen it in some way, but Marvin Vettori, we talked about how dangerous his wrestling could have been in this fight, and I think Israel Adesanya knew that, and he just did what he needed to do to retain his belt. At the end of the day, Israel Adesanya is the champion, and Marvin Vettori's got to take that away from him. So that was a fun fight. Great way to wrap it up. What a fun card. What an amazing way to wrap up such a stacked card. We saw some amazing fights throughout the whole thing. Thank you again for listening to this podcast. I really appreciate it. Please like, subscribe, do all that good stuff on all of the different platforms. If you could like it and subscribe on the YouTube channel, that would be amazing. If you could listen to it on the different podcast platforms, that'd be great as well. Thank you again. I really appreciate it, and we'll do more of these live streams, and we'll talk more about this fight. What a fight, what a card. Thank you again. This has been the Body Punch Podcast.